New year, fresh start, time to recreate myself. What will I find when I walk down this path? New friends, new goals, new challenges to be met. I will meet them, and I am going to succeed. New year, fresh start, it's time for self-discovery.
Episode 15, Obligatory Beach Episode.
Okay, listen up, everyone.
Noah smiled as he looked toward the back section of the bus where all of the students were seated. His homeroom class sat intermixed with Kazuna's. The students talked to their neighbors, they laughed, they listened to their music, and anything and everything else but turned their attention to Kazuna, who stood up at the front. The excitement in the air was so strong, it was nearly toxic. Rather than wear the school uniforms, the students wore their casual clothing. Among the students, Diane sat on one of the aisle seats. Whereas her peers spoke to their friends, Diane just sat there, with her hands resting in her lap, and her eyes dancing around to each of the groups. Uncertainty swept in her eyes.
I said listen up!
The students' eyes turned up front, and they became rigid, as if they were preparing to listen to a lecture. Noah grinned a little wider.
That's better. Now, since you're all first years, this is going to be a new and exciting experience. Don't screw this up, or your next year's trip will be to a mall. I swear to Hellos I can make that happen.
No one said anything, and so Kazuna continued.
Now, as per the tradition of our great school, we take first years to Kahoma Beach for fun in the sun and in the surf.
Someone, a young man from Noah's class, let out a cheer, but stopped mid-yell when Kazuna looked his way.
It's okay to show your joy over something like that. I said we're going to Kahoma Beach!
This time, the entire bus cheered loudly, and the smiles returned to the students' faces. When Kazuna raised her hand up, they quieted down, but the joy still remained.
Mr. Cruz and I are going to be your chaperones, but other teachers from first-year classes, as well as some other volunteers, are going to be at the beach as well. We want you to have fun, but you also need to follow our directions if something does arise. Do you got that?
Yes, ma'am.
There are usually several great meal trucks to order food from, and there are also several little restaurants near the beach. You are not allowed to leave the beach area. Break the rules, and you'll have to deal with me.
Yes, ma'am.
And one last thing. Any student caught doing anything inappropriate, either with your magic or otherwise, will be dealt with severely. Kahoma Beach is a public beach, so there will be normal humans there. Do not do anything that would tarnish the reputation of the school. Other than that, have a great day!
Kazuna gave the students one last raised hand, and then gave them a wink. The swelling need for their attention faded, and the students returned to conversing with one another. Kazuna sat down beside Noah, but peered ahead for a moment, perhaps to check their route.
I suppose this is your first time going to Kahoma Beach too, huh?
Yeah, I've never been to Kahoma Beach before, but I have been to a ton of other beaches. This trip sounds really fun.
A dark twinkle flickered in Kazuna's eyes.
Oh, it is. Remind me to tell you about what's going to happen later when the students are out of earshot.
What's going to happen? What do you mean?
Kazuna simply smiled as she placed her index finger over her lips. Noah turned back around and then grinned down at the pair of students, who sat right behind him. Seto and Kasina sat side by side, and they spoke to one another in hushed, warm conversation. The same sort of twinkle sparkled in their eyes, and wide smiles spread across their faces. Kasina's hand rested on top of Seto's, and their fingers were interlaced. When they noticed Noah looking at them, they both blushed a little.
Hey, could you two do me a little favor?
Kazuna tilted her head so she could better hear, and both Seto and Kasina leaned in a little closer to Noah.
Could you two maybe keep Diane company? She doesn't really know anyone, and that could make this trip less enjoyable if she's alone.
Kasina nodded and gave him a thumbs up with her free hand.
Sure, when we get off the bus. We'll go talk to her.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
He sat back around and faced the front of the bus.
That was sweet of you.
Well, I can understand how it feels to be alone. And who knows? Maybe those two could be good for her.
Maybe.
The bus drove down a freeway that looped around some of the taller buildings in the city. Sunlight glistened against the mirror-like surfaces of the skyscrapers, which gave them divine visages. Images of otherworldly buildings and architecture from Heavenos flashed in Noah's mind. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes. His imagination came alive, and once more he stood in the great Judean plaza. Golden buildings surrounded the plaza like doting parents watching an ornery child. The plaza had been covered in exquisite cobblestone, and a fabulous fountain sat right in the middle. A statue of an angel with their wings fully extended had been carved into the top of the fountain. The angel depiction held a staff with an ornate headpiece, and water poured from the end of the staff. Another stream of water flowed from the statue's opened palm, which was held out, pointing in the other direction. When the water cascaded down, it magically swirled around in looping arcs. The fountain itself had been a marvel of one of the greatest artificers Heavenos had ever seen. And in truth, it had been a major influence in Marzo's desire to continue on the path of the artificer. Something nudged him, and so Noah opened his eyes. Kazuna grinned at him.
Did you fall asleep?
I was just lost in thought. I was thinking about home.
Home? Were you thinking about bad things?
No, actually. I was just remembering this really cool site in the smaller city I grew up in. There was this really cool fountain I used to love sitting by.
Oh yeah? I can only imagine. We have some pretty cool fountains back home, although some of my more favorite ones might irk ya a little.
Oh. Why is that?
Because they're violent. The best ones have demons cleaving open wounds on angels, and the water comes from the many slices and injuries. On festival days, the city managers usually put silver dye in the water, and it makes the statues look more authentic.
Yeah. That is a little too violent for my tastes. I'm sure that it took great skill to make them, though.
The bus pulled off of the freeway and turned onto a street leading toward the beach. Sparkling water reached out and touched the horizon, and the sun glinted off of the water's surface. One of the students gave out a holler, which trickled to others. Within moments of pulling off the freeway, the entire bus screamed out with absolute energy and anticipation. From a distance, the beach was relatively empty, with the exception of a few dozen people scattered across the vast sandy area. A long pier stretched out into the water, and the pier had many little shops and vendors located on it.
I figured it would be busier. You mentioned that this was a public beach.
I mean, technically it is, and the public still has access to it, but our school takes certain precautions to ensure the safety and privacy of our students.
Oh?
I don't know the specifics, but for most trips, Headmistress Darbo casts a spell on the area that subtly and magically discouraged the weak-willed from wanting to go to the beach today.
Is that legal?
And who's gonna say anything? There isn't really a magic police or anything. It's harmless anyway.
I suppose there really isn't anything bad about that.
The bus they were on parked beside the other buses from Arceados Academy in a large parking lot. In addition to theirs, about half as many buses were on the far side of the lot, with about a dozen or so various cars parked between them.
Looks like we're not the only ones here on a beach day.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
The students got off of the bus and they fed into a larger group of their peers, who filed from other buses. Noah and Kazuna walked over to the front of the crowd where the other teacher chaperones were located. Isa, Gregor, and Demi were among those that Noah knew the best. As soon as the students had collected, Demi clapped her hands together several times.
All right, who's ready for a beach day?
The students cheered loudly.
Okay, so you have the next 4 hours to do whatever you like, so long as you listen to the rules that your chaperones discussed on the bus. There's lots of...
Demi stopped and stared at the students at the far left of the group. They gazed at something behind the line of teachers, and once Demi quieted down, a lot of other students looked in that direction as well. Soon, everyone was watching the larger cluster of other students, led by a couple of adults. The cluster was moving towards the Arceados Academy students.
I fucking knew it.
The woman at the front of the group was none other than the High Inquisitor Camille Farr. Rather than wear her typical robes, she wore a white two-piece bathing suit. The symbol of her order covered her right breast flap. Her dark hair had been tied into two buns that sat at the top back half of her head. Like before, her green eyes sparkled with brilliance. A pair of teachers were at her side, and a third was just a step behind her. The third teacher had dark brown hair, although Noah saw hints of lighter, blonder roots barely coming in. She was a tall woman with resonating gray eyes, and a small mouth, poised for smiling if only she heard the right joke. The woman wore a purple one-piece. For the briefest moment, her eyes locked with Noah's. His stomach dropped deeply, and yet he couldn't identify why. She only lingered on him for a moment before she looked over the other students of Arceados Academy. Inquisitor Farr and the students from St. Gabriel's stepped up to Noah's group, leaving about 6 feet between the two groups. Her students had already gotten dressed in their bathing suits. Arrogant gazes covered most of the faces of the St. Gabriel's students.
Oh, look, students, it's Arceados Academy. It looks like we beat them here just like we usually do. Beat them. How does it feel to be second rate again?
And to mirror their esteemed leader, the students from St. Gabriel's also laughed. Demi stepped up and she maintained her smile.
Listen, we're here to have fun. So why don't you go off and have your fun and leave us to ours, okay? Okay.
We were about to go claim our spot. We were thinking about taking the area beside the pier. It is the best spot after all.
But that's our spot. It's been ours for the last 25 years.
High Inquisitor Farr brought her hand to her face, and she gave off another resonating, villainous laugh.
Oh, but we were here first. It looks like your school is going to have to take the only open spot left, which is on the far side of the beach.
Demi clenched her jaw and she crossed her arms over her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but Kazuna stepped forward.
Listen here, you pretentious little twat. How about we compete for it?
Compete? That sounds absolutely delicious. What did you have in mind? We can't do Essence Ball here.
No, we can't. But we can do beach volleyball.
She stepped forward and pointed at the Inquisitor.
Let's have a massive beach volleyball tournament between our students. The winning team gets the spot by the pier.
So are we choosing one team to represent us or multiple teams?
Obviously multiple teams. More of a chance to put you stiff robe-wearing bitches in your place.
High Inquisitor Farr chuckled and then pointed at Kazuna.
No, it is you foul creatures that will be put in your place. Get dressed, form your teams, and meet us in the middle of the beach. We'll take care of the randoms. They can watch us beat you.
She started to walk away, and the students of St. Gabriel's all gave the students of Arceados Academy dark looks. When they were gone, Kazuna turned around and raised both of her hands up high.
Are we gonna let those dogmatic, arrogant little pricks and she-pricks take our spot? No! That's what I thought! Go get dressed and then form teams of 6. Let's bring those motherfuckers down!
The students cheered, and then they started running toward the outdoor changing rooms. Issa shook her head and turned to Kazuna.
A beach volleyball tournament?
I think it's a great idea. Maybe it could be a yearly tradition. The upper class students could give the incoming first years a mission to uphold the honor of our school.
We should probably get into our bathing suits too, if we're going to be in the water.
Noah followed the others to the changing rooms, and he walked into the men's side of the facility. When he walked in, many of the boys were already in the process of changing their outfits. Noah averted his eyes and chose an unoccupied stall in the back of the room. His bathing suit was a pair of red shorts with yellow island flowers spread all over it. Rather than go shirtless, Noah kept on an A-shirt. He overheard some of the boys talking.
Man, did you see some of those St. Gabriel's girls? Damn! I'd love to get cozy with some of them, if you know what I mean.
Are you kidding me? She would exercise your demon ass.
I mean, I'm down for some rough play prior. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Other boys in the dressing room laughed out loud and they slapped hands together. Noah simply rolled his eyes and secured his belongings. Another student conversation caught his attention, though.
So, Seto, what's up with you and Kasina?
Yeah, I've never had gin pushy before, but I bet...
There was a loud thud, followed by a slam against the lockers. Noah whirled around to see what the commotion was. Seto had pinned a boy twice his size against the locker, and a wild sense of wrath flourished in his eyes. When the boy tried to push back, Seto pushed all the harder and kept him in place.
Shut the fuck up. Don't talk about Kasina like that again or I'll knock all of your teeth out!
Noah cleared his throat and suddenly the other students noticed him. Seto let go, and the student who was pinned brushed himself off.
Did you see that? He attacked me.
I didn't see that, unfortunately. But I did hear what you said. I'm not surprised he did what he did. If I take action, it will be against both of you.
But I didn't do anything wrong.
Oh, really?
Noah crossed his arms over his chest and gave him a dark look.
Maybe you'd like to tell Miss Miyoshi or Miss Montbella what you said then. Or perhaps Miss Vautheis?
The boy's face blanched, and he lowered his eyes.
No, sir.
I personally don't want to hear that sort of garbage talk. So how about you all just quietly get dressed and then leave? We can just move forward and have a fun day, yes?
No one said anything and went back to getting dressed. A solemn silence had overtaken the boys, and Noah stayed in the locker room. He watched everyone with the same icy glare. Seto kept his eyes averted, and a small angry frown creased his face. Noah was the last one to leave the locker room. Demi approached him. She wore a silver one-piece and a pair of green flip-flops.
Hey, is everything okay? The boys came out of the locker rooms a little bit less enthusiastic than when they went in.
Noah winced, and then he quietly relayed the story to her. Demi frowned, and then she shook her head.
Thank you for telling me. I won't punish them because I don't want to have to punish Seto for getting physical.
Kazuna and Isa walked up to them a few moments later. Kazuna wore a two-piece with thin strings and sparkles placed on the fabric. Isa wore a two-piece, but hers was simple and colored blue.
Is everything okay? The boys were acting a little weird when they came out.
Noah opened his mouth to speak, but Demi just waved her hands.
The boys are being a little too rambunctious in the locker room, and Noah had to set him straight.
Rambunctious? Like in horseplay? Or like locker room talk?
When Demi and Noah hesitated, Kazuna asked,
Who?
It's fine. I'll take care.
Who?
Demi sighed and gave Noah a small nod. He described the student, and Kazuna growled ever so slightly. The offending student had been a student in her class. Kazuna approached the students.
All right, listen up. I need a student to help me do some special projects while we're here. That student will receive extra credit on their next test. And since I know how each and every one of you are doing grade-wise, I will select the lucky person.
She pointed to the student who Noah described.
Mitch, you need some extra credit, so you will be helping me during the volleyball tournament.
But I...
No arguing, come with me.
Kazuna walked off toward the buses, and Mitch was forced to follow. As Mitch passed Noah, he gave Noah a dark glare. The students started to collect into teams of 6. Seto, Kachina, and Diane were all on one team. By this point, Seto's smile had returned, but when he came out before, he had a disgruntled frown. Kachina immediately prodded into him, although Noah couldn't hear if he told her or not. When the students from Arceados Academy got to the prepared playing field, a series of 3 individual courts had been set up. The normal people who had been in the spot before lined the far edges of the playing field, and they watched Arceados Academy's approach with absolute eagerness. High Inquisitor Far walked over to them.
Okay, we have 10 teams. How many does your school have?
9. We have 9.
Looks like we have an advantage. How fortunate. Okay, let's write down numbers on scraps of paper and then decide who's facing who.
Demi agreed, and they managed to decide the various matches that would decide the most coveted spot on the beach. Noah watched the various students take the field, but noticed that the strange teacher watched him closely. He looked away, but when he looked back a minute later, she still stared at him with intrigue. Something about her tugged at him, and the recollection twisted his guts in knots. Issa stepped in front of Noah, and she glared at the teacher. It was only then that the teacher smiled and then looked elsewhere.
What the hell was her problem? I noticed she was making you uncomfortable. Some people are rude.
I don't know. She looks sort of familiar, but I can't place it.
I don't recognize her. I don't think she was among the teachers who attended the Essence Ball game.
Maybe it's just my mind tricking me into thinking I know her. After all, I've traveled all over this world, and I've met so many people in the last century.
Someone blew a whistle, and the games started. Kazuna came back, and Noah glanced her way.
Where's the student?
He's cleaning the interiors of the buses as a thank you to our drivers. I'll release him once the games are done.
Damn.
The games were pretty eventful, and the students appeared to have a grand time. Seto, Kasina, and Diane's team did pretty well. With each game won, Diane grew more animated, and both Seto and Kasina kept congratulating her on her excellent saves and scores. It came down to the last 6 teams, and things didn't look good. St. Gabriel's had 4 of the teams, while Arceados Academy only had 2.
You can do it, Arceados! Don't give up!
Kick their holy asses!
Crush them! Show them our dominance!
The strange teacher stepped forward and called out.
Let's fight for the victory of St. Gabriel's, shall we?
Noah's blood ran a little colder, and something icky swirled within him. His eyes met with the teacher's. She smiled devilishly, and then turned away. Noah scanned her body, and sure enough, he found what he was looking for. The teacher wore a silver ring on her right hand, much like Noah's. Noah watched the students play, and from the peripheral vision he saw that the teacher no longer watched him. He didn't directly look at her, but he still observed her as discreetly as he could. The final game and an Arceados Academy victory came down to resting on the shoulders of Seto, Kasina, and Diane's team. But unfortunately, they lost. Hours had passed, and the sun was starting to set over the distant pier. Oranges, yellows, and purples covered the sky above the pier, the ocean, and the sand. Most of the students were still on the pier, no doubt having fun. Other teachers were the chaperones on the pier, so Noah got a chance to sit on the beach. He watched the sun melt the world into brilliant art. Issa, Demi, and Kazuna sat down beside him.
Today was a good day. Even though we lost, I'm happy to see that the students had a great time.
Yeah. Even though we didn't get the spot near the pier, at least we get this amazing view.
Kazuna nudged Noah.
What's up? You've been quiet ever since the end of the games. Did our loss really affect you that much?
No, it's not that. I recognize who the teacher is.
Oh? Why do I get the feeling that I'm gonna hate your answer?
Noah lowered his gaze and stared into the ocean.
I'm pretty sure that it's Kasina.
I don't think that's possible.
Why do you say that?
For a brief moment, Kazuna and Demi looked at one another, and it was the kind of look that individuals exchanged when they both knew a secret. Rather than Kazuna, it was Demi who answered.
After the rescue of Kazuna and King Yalgodin, there were several really intense battles that destroyed entire worlds. During one of those battles, it was said that Kasina, the Archangel Sword Maiden of Blood, fell in combat and was slain by King Yalgodin himself.
Noah just stared at Demi and Kazuna. They seemed so sure about what they were saying. But Noah's insides rocked with such filthy unease. The way the woman stood, spoke, and the way she looked at him. Could it have been Kasina? Or could Kasina really have died? A sudden mental spark flickered in his mind, and his eyes opened wide.
What? What are you looking at?
The first artifact I had ever given Kasina was one that prevented her from dying. There may be a chance that she survived that battle after all.
No, wait a moment. If she were really here, I'd have felt her. We all would have.
Noah waggled his ringed finger at them.
Not if she has one of these, which might be the case. Maybe I'm just imagining things or being overly anxious. But if she has found me, then I'm in real trouble.
You haven't confirmed it though, right? So it might not be her. And you said it yourself, you might be tricking yourself into thinking you know her, right?
Noah nodded.
If it isn't her, then you're stressing over nothing. And if it is, then maybe she only suspects you too. After all, she can't feel you. So she's only making an assumption until she has hard proof.
Yeah, and if it is her and you disappear, then she will know for sure. The best thing you can do is just be calm and do what you have been doing.
The night class starts tomorrow night. What if she stumbles upon us?
She won't. Headmistress Darbo has already taken precautions, and she'll come up with more once I tell her about this new teacher development. Don't worry about that stuff for now.
Right. For now, let's just focus on the sunset and let our stress melt away.
Really is rather pretty. Oh yeah, Kazuna. Weren't you supposed to tell me about something that was going to happen?
Oh, yeah. Well, every year we...
A massive serpentine head emerged out of the ocean, right beside the pier. It looked small from the spot where Noah and the others sat, but it was no doubt massive up close. The serpentine head was covered in light blue and dark blue scales, and had long fins on its body. It opened its mouth, and it let out a massive screech. Noah hopped to his feet, but before he could say anything or summon any magic, Kazuna laughed and then grabbed his arm.
No, it's fine. That's what I was trying to tell you. It's an Arceados Academy tradition for the teachers to scare the living shit out of the first years by summoning a massive sea monster for them to fight. It's so funny to see who runs away and who fights.
But what if students get hurt? Or normal people on the pier?
Hey, don't worry, it's just a harmless prank. The sea monster is actually an immortal demigod named Mervyn, who attended Arceados Academy 100 years ago. None of the students can actually hurt him permanently, and Mervyn loves doing it.
Oh, so... we just sit here and watch?
Yeah. I remember when I was here on our field trip to the beach. The sea monster scared my friend Tracy Marcinko so bad, she crapped her swimsuit bottoms. It was so funny. Ugh, and so gross.
The light from the setting sun glinted off of Mervyn's scales, and it was actually quite breathtaking to see. Despite the beauty of the sunset, Noah's spirit still swirled around violently. An invisible shackle clenched around his neck, and now he was stuck. He couldn't run, which meant he had only one option left: